Hello everyone, nice to meet you. My name's Jack, so I am one of the founders of Augmented Simulation. Mike is the other one. And as mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking through virtual reality and medicine. Hopefully this works. It does. So as with any good way of doing simulation, we'll start with a little bit of the session overview and the learning objectives. We'll talk about the intros, who we are. We're then going to talk a little bit about the terminology around the immersive kind of education, so VR, AR, and MR, to give you a bit of background. We'll then talk to you about the tech and around the hype to that, to try and cut through some of the hype. We'll then tell you about what we've been doing in VR, and really the idea behind that is to give you a chance to get in the Oculus, experience it for yourself, and then ask us questions. And that's meant to stimulate a discussion around VR, and you can ask us anything about that, and we're more than happy to answer your questions. And during that period, we'll also be talking a little bit about the design of the virtual reality experience and how best to relate that to simulation as well. Again, point for discussion more than anything. If there's time, we'll then talk about the evidence behind it, and you can always grab us afterwards to chat through it. So, proper intros. My background was initially in psychology. I was then a nursing assistant for 2 years up in Edinburgh. I then did my F1, F2 in London, went over to South Africa for a year and taught patient-centered education there, teaching patients about diabetic education. Came back here, did my CMT1, CMT2, again in London, and during that time worked at UCH, began getting more into simulation, and that's what's kind of taken us down this line. Mike?
Yeah, so I'm Mike, I'm the other co-founder of Augmented Simulation. My background's in digital product design, particularly in kind of public sector and healthcare, both from a healthcare professional point of view and public-facing applications. And now obviously an interactive simulation.
And before we crack on with probably what we're going to be talking about, just a little bit of background about how we got here. So for the last 3 or 4 years, Mike and I have been working on a different project to the VR component called Augmented Education. This was a fully social impact project, so that was video content online, it was 360-degree content, it was normal internet content designed to expand access to medical education. So teaching doctors what they needed to know when they needed to know it. And that's been running, as I say, for 3 or 4 years now, and has actually done surprisingly well, just to give an idea of the amount of people worldwide who are looking for that kind of more immersive and free medical education. We now get so we've had 1 million users on this site over the last 3 years. So there is a big audience out there of people looking for this kind of education. And the one big thing that we learned from this was the drive towards engagement, towards immersion, and towards that more simulation-based way of learning, which we all know, it's why we're all here, but that's not just something within this room, that is something people the world over are looking for. Sorry folks, are you... No, don't worry. Are you able to manage at the back there? Yeah. Right, so what are we here to talk to you about? I would say, give you an overview of, sorry, I'm standing in the way of the slide, give you an overview of all the terminology, myth bust, so cut through all the hype around AR, VR, MR, informed decision making, because people are now going to come to you and talk a lot about VR and AR increasingly, and also you're finding it in the literature a lot more. It really helps to have an overview of what all these terms mean and the importance behind them. And then discussion, as I say, and to entertain. The more we take this out to try it with people, they really enjoy it. And we're constantly surprised by that, because it's what we do with our lives now, but actually people tend to enjoy it, so we hope you do too. Okay, a bit about you. I've spoken to that table briefly already. This was to try and get an idea of what you all do with your backgrounds, whether anyone knows anything about virtual reality. Does anyone work in virtual reality before I go on? Okay, I'm strangely reassured by that. But some of you may know what I'm talking about, some of you may know nothing. This is meant to really cover a whole gamut of people. But if you do know what I'm talking about, just listen, we might get some tidbits of information. In terms of what you do in simulation, are most people working in sim, or most people sim managers? How many people are sim faculty here, I suppose? Show of hands. Okay, great. From a clinical side, from a physician side, is that? Show of hands from a physician side, show of hands from a nursing side, fine, show of hands from a managerial side of sim. Okay, fine, so there's a kind of good boundary. And I know some of you at the back of the room do some other things as well. So that's fine, it's good to get an idea. This is a difficult question, particularly with so many of you in the room, but in the sim centres that you're faculty in, can anyone throw out the big challenges that you have, the things that you would like to, broad things you'd like to improve in those sim centres? And I know that's a tough question. I could throw out some examples of things that people have said previously, but I kind of just want to hear what you say first of all.
We're looking to offer students ways of learning that are not time limited in the same way that they are in the sim centre.
Yeah. So is that time issue, has it really been a problem for lots of people, that idea there's not enough time to deliver the sim you're meant to be delivering? How many people feel that the finance that sim is given is an issue as well, or is that less of an issue than the, I suppose, two things, the finance is a big issue, show of hands. Yeah, who thinks the time is a big issue, show of hands? Okay, I mean, that's pretty even, to be honest. And for my benefit more than anything, the use of the learners coming through, do they tend to get enough time to be able to take time out of their clinical work to come to sim, or is there not enough time? Show of hands for not enough time? Fine, show enough hands for, yeah, they all got all the time they need to come through. Okay, great. One person in a lovely sim centre. Fine, this was some of the ideas that I had about challenges in sim centres, because Mike and I have been various places around the UK and around the world. Do any of these not resonate with people? Do any of them resonate particularly with people? There's a general nod of heads there. Anyone disagrees with any of these?
I don't think it's difficult to make the case for simulation now. I think it's all about them. I think organisations like ASPE have been very successful in engaging colleges, healthcare managers, people in patient safety. And France's report has very clearly articulated that simulation is vital to train people in the understanding of how it happens. So I don't think making the case in terms of the theoretical case has been difficult. Now, in the last 2 years, it's just about.
Yeah. And that's on the local level and the national level, I'm assuming. Yeah.
And I work in undergraduate medical education, and we don't feel it as much as the NHS.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, terminology. Now, I wasn't quite expecting so many people here, but on the tables are pens and papers. So, in literally 1 minute or so, and you may know a bit about this, you may know nothing, can you scribble down what you think I mean by virtual reality, what I mean by augmented reality, what I mean by mixed reality, and any examples of the use of those different things in healthcare or not in healthcare? And you can chat in your tables about that. Mike is timing.
The camera brings us through the field. The software
You'll see if I here, I see the tables.
Okay, everyone, Mike is telling me we're out of time. I'm sorry, I'm ruled by this man. Okay, so I'm just going to pick on tables for each of them, I think, as there's 3 of you. Virtual reality.
Well, we had 2 options. One was that it's an umbrella term for all the different types of CG.
Yeah.
Also, it's generally a complete VR, a complete CG environment, so there's no real world interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would totally agree with that, and I'll go back and explain why that's absolutely right later. Augmented reality?
You're just going to kind of like layering on top of an image you might access with a device like a phone. We had examples like Pokemon Go or Tourist app where you can identify key markers of places that you can go. But like if we had it open here and we're scrolling around the room, we'd see everybody and here whatever was layered on top would be built into the room somewhere.
Perfect and mixed reality. Slightly more
One we haven't had any access to, but that's it. Mixture.
I see what you've done there.
Cheaper headsets, but
cheaper headsets. Okay. I will. So partly those 2 essentially right. Mixed reality. Mixed reality is more difficult because there are difficulties around the terminology. I'm going to explain the overview umbrella term for them, but this is not necessarily to be taken as read. What I'm going to explain is the way to think about it, the way to really define it. So. VR, as you said, the whole point, and I explain this by these are super simple pictures, but it really gets an idea of what it is. Your little virtual alien, your digital alien, is totally encased in that virtual world. The way we do this is with headsets such as the Oculus. Everything that you see in the real world, in your vision, is virtual. Augmented reality, as you say, is literally a layering on top of your real world. So you can see your real world, there is something placed on top of it, and I'll take you through examples of that. Mixed reality is not really a mixture of the 2. It's much more that you can still see your real world, or a digital image, but of your real world, and that digital object that's put in it can interact with it. So your little digital alien, for example, could be behind this table. I could then go away, leave the room. My headset might remember where it is, and it would still be there interacting with the table. I could move around, it would be able to be in contact with the table. It's not the same as augmented. Augmented is just placed on top. I'm going to take you through examples of these so that might become clearer later. Okay, I'm going to start with augmented, and I'll work very quickly through mixed and then get to virtual, because I'm really here to talk about virtual. Augmented reality, exactly as you say, can be as simple as using an app on your phone. Every time you take your phone out, point it at someone, I don't know who this guy is, but whenever you get bunny ears or stars over people's eyes, that's augmented reality. Again, as you say, Pokemon is the other perfect example. You've got your real world and you've got a tiny Charmander placed on top of it. It does not need to be difficult. However, this is the best way really of thinking about augmented reality in a more professional sense. So this is Google Glass. The idea being it was released in 2013, literally a pair of glasses so you can see your real world through them, but there's a camera here and there's a little reflector there. What that means is it can project down a computerized image onto your vision so that you can have, if you like, a head-up display of what you're seeing there. This is probably the best picture I've seen of it. So this person is pressing a little button on the side of their Google Glass and projecting up flight times. You can project up text, you can project up videos of people telling you what to do, overlaid on what you're seeing in the real world. It's got really good uses, particularly in things like industry. So this is a genuine picture of someone using it in industry, and the point being there they can look at the plans, they can look at instructions of the things they're doing in the industrial space, and they can also get advice from people if they're not sure about it through video. Fantastic use of the technology. But the big problem with Google Glass was not the technology. It was not even the good uses of technology like this. It was the way it was marketed. So 2003, they came out and said, hey, let's give it to loads of people in the States, but let's put a price point of $2,000 and let's only give it to the people in LA, and let's just let them wander around and see what they do with it. And this wasn't necessarily the best strategy, because it created a group of people in glass holes who were the people you would imagine would get into this at a very early stage. And they went around taking photos of people and got in huge problems about privacy, and it gave the Google Glass a massively bad rep because people thought, well, it's just used by glass doors. That completely tanked all of their sales, and they haven't made any profit until back on this year, where they now released a version specifically for the industry. So it's now back in that industrial space. So when people think of Google Glass, they think a huge failure, Google's biggest ever failure. Actually, it's a great bit of tech and it will start coming back in. It's just about, as with everything, what problem are you solving with the technology? And that's what we're going to be talking about. Very quickly, another use of AR. And I'm not sure if these people here, it's called Accuvane. Has anyone seen Accuvane in use? Yeah, great. So the idea behind Accuvane is it's very good at finding veins on people. It projects a bit of infrared down. It picks up heat under the skin. It then picks up that signal and then reprojects down a visual light so that you can see very precisely where the veins are. Not what you normally think of as augmented reality, but it's still augmenting your reality, so it still counts. So from phones to Google Glass to Accuvane, lots of different ways of doing augmented reality. Mixed. This is going to be very quick. And I know there is some mixed reality here. Best way of thinking about mixed reality is HoloLens. HoloLens, again, is a very lovely bit of kit made by Microsoft. Again, you've got the glass that you can see through. Again, you've got a very complex series of cameras, and you've got that image screen projecting down. So you can have your digital image projected on your real world, but the cameras can map your real world and know exactly where those objects are going to be placed in terms of the depth. So they can place your little alien behind that table, and when you move backwards, they know exactly where it is. So it can just keep it as if it looks like it's integrated with your real world. Of course, it's not, it's a digital image, but it looks like this. This is probably the best way to think about it. Again, digital, interacting with real world, and two humans able to interact with that digital object. And very good uses in healthcare. The best one that I've seen is CAE, who make this lovely way of doing ultrasound to be able to see it. They're out that way, if you're interested in it. And it's a good use. Again, it's solving a problem with a very specific kind of technology. It's exactly what we should be doing with this. Okay. Moving rapidly on to the point of why we're all here. Virtual reality. This is not what we're doing. Virtual reality has been around for a long time. I don't know what this guy's doing. I think that's a radio distracted space. But the point is, there's been a lot of hype about virtual reality recently. It has been around for ages. There have been loads of hype cycles around it. Try not to be drawn into all of that. The whole point is, what problem are you solving with your technology? And that's where we've got to today, which is the Oculus Rift. And that's what we're going to be showing you later on. Now, the rationale behind all of these different bits of kit, and this is all the stuff that you've got, is that they do different things. And what we're going to be focusing on here is talking to you about two different ways of having a VR experience. Google Cardboard and Oculus Rift. They are at opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of what you can get through VR. Google Cardboard is what you've got on your table. In that, you put a phone, you can see things like a 360 video. You can't interact with it. If you move your head using the cardboard, you don't move your head in the virtual world. It's literally just like watching a 360 video. That can be good, and there are excellent uses. This chap over here was talking about 360 video, not through Google Cardboard, but 360 video to introduce children to a hospital setting. Really lovely way of doing it, perfect use of solving a problem. Is you want a kid to have a properly immersive experience that they don't need to interact with, great, put them in a 360-degree headset, someone going through a hospital, they will feel like they're there. So it does have its uses. For us, however, there is a value in going towards something like the Oculus Rift. And what I'm going to do is just flip that back to tell you very briefly about what the Rift does that other things don't necessarily do in space. And that's head tracking. So, like I was saying, when you move your head in the real world, with Oculus Rift, there are three different things in it. There's accelerometers, there's gyrometers, and there's magnetometers. These basically sense exactly where your head is in space. The way your head is moving, the way your head is tilting, how fast it's accelerating. And what that means is that everything you do in the real world corresponds to the virtual world. That's not just a fancy bit of tech. Psychologically, that does something really interesting, and it gives you that sense of presence. So it's like in Sim, we talk about immersion, we talk about fidelity, but people take presence for granted because, of course, we're there in the real world. You can't get that through a flat screen. You can't get that through e-learning, even though there's fantastic learning out there. You can only get that through using something that does proper head tracking and the high-end virtual reality like this. And hopefully we'll get that across when you have a look at the Google Cardboard and the Oculus together, is that sense of presence. And it's that presence, and there's very good research out there saying that the presence and immersion is what's important in transferring that learning to practice. It's why Sim works so well, because you're essentially learning in an environment where you're going to be regurgitating that knowledge. It's that transfer is very easy. It's the same with virtual reality. You are learning in the same environment where you're going to be regurgitating that knowledge. That is why virtual reality works. And there is good research to back that up. I can show you the evidence at the end. I know we're very pressed for time, so come and grab me afterwards. I'm happy to talk to you about the evidence. Mike, anything I missed there?
No.
No? Fantastic. Okay, very briefly on hype. Anytime anything hits the market, it comes in, the press, media get hold of it, and they go, this is brilliant. This is going to solve all of the world's problems. We can do anything with this. And then suddenly people think about there, no, shit, it can't do everything. It can't really do much at all. Because people haven't looked necessarily at the problems that they're solving, and the software hasn't been built yet to deal with those issues. This leads to the incredibly named Trough of Disillusion, which I love. But we are now out of that with VR. VR has just about gone through the trough of disillusionment of everyone going, oh, nothing's going to come of VR, this is rubbish. And actually, finally now, because people are beginning to use VR, not just for gaming, not just for videos, which is where all the money is, but they're beginning to think, okay, what problems can we solve using immersive technology? We are now coming up the slope of enlightenment onto the plateau of productivity. This isn't me that made this up, by the way. This is called Gardner's hype cycle. So we are there. So now is the time to actually begin to get excited from a practical point of view about what virtual reality is. This is just a reflection of what I said about the flat screen. This is vSim for nursing. It is a very good e-learning tool for nurses, I think, personally. However, they describe themselves as vSim, the idea being this is virtual simulation. That really annoys me, because I'm a purist about this, and to me that is not truly virtual. You have to be in that virtual world. But this is the other problem that's leading to hype around virtual reality and that drop in hype, and also really complicating the literature around things. If you start a virtual reality simulation, everything will be screen-based, and it's very difficult to tease out actually what's truly immersive, engaging simulation from what's on screen. I don't have any really good workarounds for that other than to be critical about what you're reading and think from the outset, is this screen-based? Is it in a virtual reality headset? And if so, how recent was it? Because things have moved on a lot in the last year. You know, these only came out really a year and a bit ago. So do just be critical of what you're seeing. Not everything that says it's virtual is virtual. This is more about the Oculus, more about presence. I've kind of talked you through that already. And this is just saying, this is virtual reality. You are in that virtual space fully, but it doesn't have to be just one person. So you can have, and I'm going to be asking you in your groups to come up with solutions to various problems using VR. So think about this. It doesn't have to be one person. You can actually have other virtual people interacting in your virtual space. So you could be a doctor doing a virtual simulation in Telford. There could be a doctor in London, also in their VR headset, using that same game engine, that's how we produce things, and still working in that same simulation. So it can be fully interactive. And you can, in this game, you can actually throw things to each other in that virtual world. You can talk to each other in that virtual world. So it really is transposing two people from different parts of the world into one place. And this is just another picture. The final thing to say, before we get on to talking a little bit more about what we've been doing, is the way controllers work in virtual reality. So obviously I've described the immersion, I've described the sense of presence. The other huge thing that comes with presence is not only that sense of being in the physical space, that sense of the physical space reacting with you, it's that sense of being able to interact with the physical space and get something back from it. The key ways of doing that is some kind of interaction. Many different ways. One is a hand controlling clicker, which is what you'll see us using. The reason for that is it's simple. And you need to do something that's not too complex if you're going to get lots of people through this. That idea of accessibility versus incredible hype. Only try and solve the problem that you're trying to solve. Don't go overboard. So we only use a hand controller. However, for the things that I'm going to ask you to do, don't just think in terms of hand control. You can also use haptics. So this person down here, and I'm sure, when I talk about VR, I'm talking about VR in medicine. There's a huge amount of VR in surgery out there. I'm really just confining it to that decision-making under pressure in the virtual immersive world of medicine. But you can use haptics. You can use hand controllers, so if you hold this hand controller in the virtual world, you'll see your hand looking like a real hand. And if you straighten out your fingers on the hand controller, it will look like a virtual hand. Quite cool. And the other things that are about to come through are this. It is called Leap Motion. It's a way of, there's a sensor on your VR headset. It looks down at your hands. It then maps what your hands are doing without having any gloves on and puts that in the virtual world. So you don't need to have any controllers in your hands, but in the virtual world, your hands will be moving as they would be in the physical world. Again, that is available. Again, we might be using it over the next few months, but we're staying away from it for now. So that's the same. Okay. I've been talking for a long time. Are there any questions so far before I move on to the next stage? Yes?
This is hugely interesting. Thanks for a great presentation. I'm not very familiar with the latest developments in the hardware. Obviously, there's head tracking is built into them at the moment. Is eye tracking something that is going to be built in, or there are plans that for the future will be incorporated?
I'm going to refer this one on to Mike.
Yes. So, I mean, there are headsets that you can get that are currently available. I think it's called the Pottle headset, and it already has eye tracking. You can play some pretty cool games where you can shoot things just looking with your gaze. In terms of implementation into things like the Oculus Rift and the Vive, it is coming, but it's not publicly available yet, and don't have a date on when it will be.
I just think predominantly, like, in the context of, say, that you have obviously somebody completing a laparoscopic scale, they're not going to be moving their head around an awful lot like this. It's just pretty much going to be their eyes moving around. So if the system doesn't pick that up, you end up doing a lot of stuff that you're not really going to do in the real world purely because the system has to register that you're actually looking at different things. So if the eye tracking comes in where you get those 5 movements, that'll be much more useful.
And as an aside on that front, so you can, the good thing about using something like the Rift is you've got an enormous array of things around you, so it feels like you're there. What you need to do when you're designing these kind of games is actually, people's gaze is only through 27 degrees. They will only really see what's happening within a window of 27 degrees. 60 degrees is where they can see by flicking their eyes around. Anything larger than that, they will have to move their head. So that idea of eye tracking and of visual tracking is really important when we're designing it.
In terms of physiological effects, is there still issues with motion sickness and things like that, or is that very much dependent on the individual?
Good question, and absolutely. So it's dependent on the hardware that you're using, it's dependent on the individual and their individual propensity to it, but almost more important than all of that, it's to do with the game design.
Okay, yeah.
So everything we've been doing is trying to make you feel grounded. What you don't want to do is have a game that's making you move in the virtual world, but not in the physical world. You then get a vestibular disconnect between what's happening. That's really what makes people feel sick. And we've tried very hard not to do that, and our trials will show that people don't feel sick using what we've done. But please let us know if you do feel sick, because that's really important for us. But it's much more about the movement in the physical world without moving in the virtual world. But all very good questions. Any other points?
Do you have any issues with the tactile feedback?
So no, but it entirely depends on what problem you're trying to solve again. So what we're doing is trying to give people that sense of immersion and presence and ability to make decisions in that pressurized situation. If you were trying to do, for example, you want to teach them exactly how to do an abdominal examination, or you want to teach them that feel of what it's like to put in a catheter, for example, that would require haptic feedback in some way, shape or form. our view at the moment is still that that kind of skill is best taught in other ways. I think that is still best taught through something physical as opposed to the haptics. It will end up being taught through haptics, but again, it's still not quite there yet, I would say.
Would an augmented approach then be better than a virtual approach?
Absolutely. So yes, definitely. And I think it's that idea of what you would need for that is potentially, in fact, I'm not going to tell you because that's one of the things I'm going to ask you to do. So yes, good question, but I hope the answer to that will come up later. But yes, it wouldn't be virtual. Virtual reality would not be the best way of solving that.
Creation of purely virtual content is relatively user accessible now, isn't it? But are there any non-expert platforms for developing augmented content? Because a lot of this sounds like you need people with real expertise to actually create the content, or cost involved in doing that. So you can make a 360 degree video simply, but actually the more complex stuff, is there anything that's accessible now for the average sort of user?
So I'll answer the first bit, and then I'm going to refer you on to the more difficult part. So 360 video, absolutely. If that's what you're using as virtual reality, that is now very easy to do. You do literally film it and you can put it in a headset. Creating the digital content to make a CGI fully interactive environment is much more difficult. So we use commercially available game engines, so you can use Unity and things like that. These engines are out there, but you do need specialist developers for them. So we have a team of overall 10 or so people producing this content for us, and a team of clinicians as well, designing that content and putting it all together. So yes, it is, particularly if you want to make a platform that all those simulations can work around, that does take a lot of work. Having said that, you can make a simple virtual world. You could learn Unity and cobble it together yourself, but at the moment it is not cheap to do, I think, to be honest. The cost will come down, but it's definitely not cheap right now. In terms of AR platforms?
I think they all require some degree of technical skill. I'm not aware of any really easy platforms to do kind of customized content at this stage. I may be wrong, someone else might know of something, but it's not mine.
Have a look at Zapper, Z-A-P-P-A-R.
Okay.
Zapper.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I was just going to say that the 360 video is so easy to make now, you can set the phone. We're looking at ways of overlaying just really simple text content on top of the video. There are platforms that allow you to do that yourself and allow the students to interact with that. So selecting options, answering questions, putting text in. It's dead simple.
Okay.
It's not quite what you're thinking of.
So that's the first steps, yeah.
But it's the first
Yeah.
step.
Thanks.
Great, okay. Because we're pushed for time, I will push on, because what we really want to do is, and I know what you all want to do, is set the demos. Come on, allow me to take you through this first of all. A little bit about us, because this is going to be important for the demos, so you get some background to what we can do. We started, as we said, from a medical education background and a sim background. We looked at the features of successful sim, which you'll all know, they've been out there for a long time. And we looked at, okay, everyone knows that feedback and debrief is by far the most important thing behind simulation, not just the immersion, but the feedback you get. Fine. The second point is what we always missed, and it's that idea that actually, and like you were all saying about the problems of time, is you do not have the time or the money or the ability to get people through simulation again after that feedback and after that debrief. And that's the key point in simulation. You need to get people through it again so that they can upskill, so that you can get that idea of deliberate practice in. And very much what we saw with the virtual reality way of doing simulation is if you can give them that truly immersive, stressful environment that feels like real life, if you can give them a process of feedback and debrief that they relate to, and if you can give them the opportunity to go back and do that sim again, that immediately covers off your top two. And everything else, provided you base what you're doing around physical simulation, essentially covers the rest. So curriculum integration, range of difficulty levels. That's about designing your sim syllabus more than anything. And you can do that just as well in virtual reality as you can in anything else. So we focus on the idea of repetitive practice and deliberate practice around that with the immersion that involves. We use Oculus Rift, which I'm not going to talk about because I've gone on about it already. Okay, two components to what we do. The first is the immersive environment. That's what you're going to try out. We create this, what we're going to show you is a prototype version. It will work, it may break on you, but the point is that you'll get the idea of it. We are completely redeveloping this platform based on all of the trials that we've done at UCLH. We've got the full revamped version, which is a platform that we can put scenarios on top of from January. This is just to give you an idea of how it feels. But there is the virtual environment and the scenario. That is written very much in terms of, as you would in physical simulation. You start with your learning objectives, you start with the individuals that are going to be using it, you look at all the kind of stuff you're going to need in that, all the AG results, etc., all the kind of things that the people are going to say in different kinds of ways. You put all that together, and we've created a platform where you put all that together, and you create a scenario based on essentially the same things that you would in physical simulation. And it makes a very complex decision tree that basically they can interact with as they would in real life. You can click on objects and you'll be able to interact with them. There's no story arc to this. It is literally, you can do whatever you want. As I say, designed by clinicians and sim professionals in terms of how the scenario works, in terms of how the scenario is built. Because we're being filmed, we can't tell you about how we built it, but do come up to us afterwards and we will be able to tell you a little bit more. After all this, everything that you do in that simulation, in terms of every action that you do, based on the fact that this is about changing behavior, it's about changing the way you respond to things. All the actions that you do are logged. They are then fed into an enormous feedback algorithm that is specific to the scenario. That looks at everything you've done in that scenario based on best practice, and it maps what you did well, and it maps areas to improve on. And you can then go through that, and you can expand on the different points if you don't understand them. They're all time-stamped. You can link out to different resources. Institutions are able to customize all of this if they want to. So you'll get a group of scenarios for your institution. If the institution actually wants to teach something else through those scenarios, that's fine. They can customize the feedback that their students are getting, and they can customize the resources that those students see afterwards. And also, because doctors are incredibly competitive, we give them a score. And what we found, we very much on Bernard, always a score a good idea. It's not very sim. The whole safe space, it's going to ruin it. Actually, people love it. They love a score. And they go back in and repeat it. 100% of the people we took through this wanted to repeat it, even the people who got 95%, because they want to do better. And the great thing about the anonymity of VR is all the idea of psychological safety is taken care of already. No one cares that they're being assessed by a computer because it's in virtual reality and they can see the rationale behind that assessment. They just want to know how they're doing and they want to improve. So we found that works very well. And also at the end, as well as the feedback, you do get a full breakdown of your learning objectives, the technical skills, the non-technical skills that you would do. And it just gives you an idea of what one looks like in each of the assessments, which is what we'll be showing you. There we go. There's also an area for reflective practice. The idea being they can feed this out to their e-portfolio, etc. So they can actually log this as a proper learning activity. Results of our trials. This is a very, very small trial that we've been running at UCLH. This was really to look at the way we do the debrief, something I completely forgot to tell you about, as well as the immersive component and the feedback component. In the middle of that, what we do is a period of self-reflection. And that is guided self-reflection. It's very much the kind of open questions you would get after doing physical simulation. How did that go? What went well? What went badly? And encouraging people to talk through that. The idea being that actually, the idea of a self-debrief has really come into the literature recently, and there's lots of stuff out there about how to encourage self-debrief. What we were doing is to see whether you can do self-debrief on these scenarios, whether when you follow that with really structured feedback and you get them to go in, people respond to that. So this was a study, small mixed method study run by the Institute of Education at UCL, who we're working with, that show essentially that people respond to it very well. Obviously, n equals 15, take it with a pinch of salt, but still, people are saying yes, and particularly from the prototype, people are saying they respond to this. We were very encouraged by that. Any questions about this? Do stop me, or else I'll just carry on talking. As well as the quantitative data, we also looked at the qualitative data. So we've looked at the specific action points within that scenario that we were trying to teach people. As I say, this is response-based, this is behaviour-based, and we saw that the times of fluids improved, antibiotics improved, oxygen delivery improved, and their overall score improved throughout these scenarios. So it's not just that people say, oh yes, this works. It's actually that we could say, well, it doesn't just work, this improves their full results from it. And all of these metrics are made available to the institutions. So the institutions can manage the kind of scenarios that people go through, but they also get feedback on what everyone has done, so they can actually follow up and see how many sims people have gone through and how well they've done in them, depending on whether the learners are happy with that. This is still a work in progress. We understand they might not want all of their scores to be shared. Okay, demos.